Happy morning.
Happy morning.
How was the rest of your day yesterday?
Good. It was a Monday.
It was a Monday. What do you mean by that?
Um, I don't know. Did some stuff. Was pretty productive. And then had book club.
Oh, nice. What book were you reading?
It was called The Husbands. It was basically like a reverse Stepford Wives.
Oh. For people who aren't familiar with that, what does that mean?
Like where it's been a while since I've seen that movie too, but all the wives are like perfect little like robot wives. And so I guess this book was the talking about how to get the perfect husband by brainwashing him to do the help with the kids and chores.
Gotcha. Well, speaking of
We should
perfect
bring him in
husband,
here.
let me go deal with our barking dog.
It's trash day.
Hey.
Recycling day. One of those. Whoa, you're crazy. Thank you. Oh my goodness.
Oh, he just wanted to turn it into a family show.
Just a wild and crazy dog.
For everyone who hasn't met him yet, this is our doggo, Linky. Well, his full name is Lincoln, but sometimes he gets just the Linky.
Mm-hmm.
The affectionate, shorter Linky. So, yeah, Stepford Wives came out, I feel like early 2000s, something like that. And, yeah, they were actually literally...
I think they... Spoiler alert.
I was going to say, it's been 15 plus years, I'm pretty sure.
If you haven't
Spoiler
seen it by
alert.
now, probably not going to. So I think they're robots at the end.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was about to say that, and I was like, that might be a spoiler. But, you know, it's been long enough.
Yeah.
So, yeah, interesting to have it flipped on its head to where the men are the one who are brainwashed, I guess, in this case, and not actually robots.
Yeah. I didn't finish the book, so I don't know.
Well, what is the book club that you're in?
It's with the Corbin women of my family. So we've got my 2 aunts, my cousin, my sister, my mom, and me. There's 6 of us. And we started, I think it was 2019, actually, before the year of COVID.
Oh, yeah?
Yes.
Well, that's pretty cool. What's that been like doing that with your family?
That's been awesome. So I was trying to remember like how we first got the idea. But I think it was because my aunt is in at least one other book club, and I used to be in a book club whenever I was working in California. I started one with a couple friends, and my Grammy's in a book club. So yeah, I feel like we were just like, oh, we should have a family book club. We like to read, so. Yeah.
Nice.
Do a book club. It's a hobby.
Yeah, it is. So yesterday, well, thanks for sharing a little bit about your book club. The main thing I wanted to point out with that was I am a huge fan of that, and I think that's a really cool thing that you did. And it was an idea that your aunt had a few years ago now, which was cool to hear because I didn't realize it had been that long.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, it's an excuse for the 6 of you guys to get together once a month and chat, which for some of those people you maybe didn't talk to perhaps maybe even once a year before that. So now you guys are a part of each other's lives, and you have an excuse, if you will, to get around and talk about something and think about some things. And I imagine that sometimes you guys have interesting, deep discussions about some things in the books, and other times you're like, the book, who needs it?
Yeah. Like, I would say it's regularly probably more than 50% just like conversation and catch up, and less than 50% is the book discussion. So
yeah, well,
it's a good mix.
sometimes all you need to spend some time with people, though, whether it's friends, family, or otherwise, is just an excuse to get together and to have an activity to be centered around, if you will. And it's like, hey, if all else fails, at least we can talk about the book or whatever.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of times the book discussion prompts personal conversation, or like, oh, I remember when this story happened. So that's my favorite type of discussion to stem from book prompts.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So for those of you at home and you've never thought about or done a book club before, that's a great way to connect with some people. And whether it's your friends or your family, and it doesn't take really anything to get started. You just say, hey, I think it's up to you how you want to do it. You could go and have a book in mind that you want to read or you've always wanted to read. Or maybe you want to join in our book club that we'll be doing sometime here in the future. No promises as to when yet, but we're going to be doing something around the book Crucial Conversations at some point. So if you want a natural thing to have some discussions about, although admittedly it's the type of book that we very much encourage you to read and engage in and learn from because it can change your life. So, a different kind of book club. So maybe you don't want to do that as your light, fun, goofy book club. Maybe you want to just pick a nice little easy page turner, especially if you're inviting some people who maybe don't read very often or haven't read in a while. Mm-hmm. Do you have any suggestions of good books or authors for people to start with for their first book club?
Yes. Colleen Hoover, I think, is, I don't know if I would call her like a gateway author, but I have seen multiple people comment on her like Instagram, or she's said she's heard from readers that like her book is a book that gets someone back into reading after they had taken a long hiatus, or maybe they like hadn't read since school. So, yeah, I think Verity would be a good one to start with. It's very gripping.
Verity, Verity.
Yep.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that. So for those who aren't aware of who that is, say it again. Her name.
Colleen Hoover.
Colleen Hoover.
You almost said Leanne Moriarty, which is
I did.
Another one of my favorite authors, but her books are probably a little longer than a first easy, quick read back into reading. Although I think 9 Perfect Strangers might be one of her shorter ones.
Right. And also, that's another fun thing to do with the book is to see how it got adapted into the movies or into the TV. And 9 Perfect Strangers came out with the HBO... Hulu came out with the Hulu miniseries, or is it single?
Series? I don't know.
Series? Is it a single season?
I think so.
And where they adapted the book for TV shows. And, I mean... Maybe we're biased because we read it and we liked the book, but I thought the show was very good.
Yeah, I like the show a lot. And, 9 Perfect Strangers as a book, I didn't like as much as Big Little Lies either.
Oh, that's right, Big Little Lies. Did you already mention that one?
No, but that's okay. HBO. And that's Leanne Moriarty.
That's Leanne Moriarty as well. So if you're the type of person who really likes TV, especially drama, then maybe Leanne Moriarty is a author you could get into. But as Danielle mentioned, maybe it's not as easy to read. So if it's the first one you've ever done, maybe it's not the easiest. But that's the one approach is you could watch one of these shows and then read the book and use that as a way. It's like, oh, it feels familiar. You don't have to like maybe quote unquote work as hard to like follow things and think about things. And but you can also see what the differences are. And another thing for people to keep in mind at home is that, reading is whatever you want it to be. Like, I feel like there's definitely times, especially because, I'm such a big attention to detail guy and always want to know all the things and remember all of the things and don't want to miss anything. Like, that's a big thing for me when I'm consuming content is like, I want to be like fully focused and not miss stuff.
Don't want to miss a thing.
Yes, that's exactly right. Thank you. This has been Danielle's Karaoke Hour.
I just hear song lyrics all day, like when people say stuff. So.
I like it. But having I've realized like, hey, you can read a book and it's okay to miss some stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, don't worry about catching every last detail, every last description. Like, oh, you forgot who that person is. Oh, well. Also, that's one of the things I've really liked about using a Kindle or any e-reader is you can click and highlight, press and hold on a word. And that's another thing I think that keeps a lot of people from reading is they're like, oh, the vocabulary, like, I don't know what that word is. Well, you used to have to pull out a dictionary. Then it evolved to where you pull out your phone and you type it in, which you can still do if you're reading physical pages.
Or you just say screw it and
move
get
on.
by on context clues and
get by on context.
Well, I'm gonna miss that sentence.
Yeah, which is fine too. But if you want to, and you're like me, you're like, all right, I want to know what that is. You press and hold, and it'll show you the definition right there. And Kindle also has this cool feature called X-ray. So you can be like, oh, wow, there's this character, Danielle, like she seems so engaging on this page, but yet so aloof, smart yet goofy. But why does she keep eating all of this cheese? And you're like, I don't know. I can't remember. I put this book down a while ago. But I remember she was eating cheese like 17 chapters ago. So there's at least one commonality between your character. Well, if you press and hold on Danielle and hit the X-ray, it'll show you all of their appearances in the book up to that point. Which is pretty cool because you can kind of just arrow through and be like, oh yeah, okay, they were the one who, yep, she got that sugar daddy, yep, did all those fun things. So yeah, that's a cool feature called X-ray within Kindle. For those who aren't aware.
Yeah, well, and another click and highlight feature on Kindle that I love using is the ability to highlight quotes and then make notes on them. So, like for me, I'm constantly like highlighting something that's like, oh my gosh, I was just reading about this concept the other day, or I just saw this in a movie, and like put the date of when I was reading the book and kind of use it as like my little like journaling in the margins of my Kindle books sort of concept. And also like if I really like a passage, I'm like, ooh, it would be good to do something like this for this character in my novel or whatever. And then like for the husband's book, that was something where I really liked the way that she did the prologue. It was kind of like this sarcastically toned from a woman's point of view, like, can you just imagine if we lived in a world where all the husbands didn't have to be asked before they like just knew to go change the diaper, or didn't have to ask where to put away the stuff or where to find this in the kitchen, if they just knew it on their own, like the super like in a world where,
right.
Yeah. And so I was like, ooh, so I yesterday I got distracted while I was trying to read and catch up on that book club book. And then I took a break to go do like a 20-minute writing session, rewriting that prologue as if it was for the main character of my book, and like all of her sarcastic comments about she's going to be hearing about like some adultery that's going on in her friend group, and just being very sarcastic, like, imagine what if we lived in a world where we could just trust our husbands to not give in to temptation 30% of the time, or whatever the cheating statistic is.
Right.
But like that's something I like to do when I read as a writer, but obviously not everyone's going to read like that.
No, but that's cool. Thank you for sharing. And I also like that as an idea for, hey, like you can use a book or a scene or any of that stuff as like a journal prompt. Like, hey, what would this look like in my life? What would I do differently if I just wanted to make this in a fictional world? Like, you know, a lot of people, it's kind of like saying like, oh, I'm creative or I'm not creative. Like, I'm a writer, I'm not a writer. Like, we're all writers. You literally just need to start using your hand and, you know, writing something out or typing something out, and there you go, you're a writer. So like if you want, and you thought about this type of thing before, or maybe you never have, maybe this is a good time for you to just be like, hey, maybe I'll just read a chapter or a scene, and then I'll write something similar, but I'll change a couple details. Maybe I'll insert people in my life, or maybe during that scene, like, oh, I'll have the Joker come in, who, not like the evil Batman Joker. Well, if that's what you're going for, it depends on. But you could have like the class clown come into the situation and cause some havoc and see what jokes he might come up with or whatever. Like you can make whatever silly stuff that you want in there. And I think that's a big thing that I've learned through you, is to not censor yourself and just write the stuff out, because guess what? It doesn't matter if it just stays in the dark pages of your journal for no one to ever see. Or if you record yourself playing ukulele song for like the first time, and you like do it in like the quiet corner all by yourself. And then later over weeks, you finally quietly share it with people, and people are like, this is really good. You should do more of this. And maybe sometimes it's like, okay, I like what you're doing. Maybe you still need a little bit more work, you know, and And if someone says you should definitely not do this, never again, like, okay, then that's too strong. Like maybe you need a little bit of work, but don't let that person discourage you from doing it. Because also remember, at the end of the day, you can do it for whatever reason you want. You don't have to make money off of it. You don't have to do anything. And it can just be something that you like to do. And something about ideas going to the page and stimulating yourself that way. Yeah, we're all about stimulating yourself here on this show.
Hobbies.
Yes. We'll get to hobbies in a second. This is a good tie-in. Stimulating yourself, that is.
One thing, ukulele and like all these things we're talking about.
Right.
And Kaylina last week was saying something about like being willing to suck at something first.
Yes, I like that.
Before you can get skills.
Yeah. So we'll put a link in the chat for the episode with Kaylina last week, because I thought of her as well when you were talking about doing kind of your remixes, if you will. And that was Kaylina, one of the sources of inspiration she used she did a 365 project where she did a new illustration every day. And one of the ways she came up with ideas was she looked on Instagram and she saw a picture that she liked, and then she would do an illustration. Sometimes it was the same thing. Sometimes it was a black and white thing, and she gave it color. So I really like the idea of, using those remixes as ways to be creative. And don't think that's like a low, like a cheater way to do things. Like, it's very much a valid way to do things. I'm also going to share in the chat a link to this video I watched yesterday, actually, about a bunch of songs, like modern day songs that are based on classical music.
Oh.
And I thought that was a cool concept and a good reminder. Like, hey, everything's always going to be updated, changed, remixed, and it's like, hey, I know some of these songs, and is kind of cool to hear. Is like, oh yeah, I know that, dun 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 dun. Like, I never realized that made it into this pop song or whatever. So I'll share a link to that in a second, and it also includes, just so you're aware, this is one of many videos on his page with the same kind of shtick. I think he said it was his 6th time he had done that. So you can, if you find that interesting, you can go and scroll and find the other ones that he's done with that as well. But let's do a quick recap of yesterday, and then we'll move forward. Oh, last thing I wanted to mention for those, another note on the Kindle thing, was as you're doing those highlights and notes and things like that, you can use the app Readwise, and you can use that to sync all of those to a website, and that can then you can connect Readwise with other things. On our episode a week and a half ago, or was it last week, with Eric, we had the 2 Erics.
That was 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So not Thursday, but the Thursday before, Eric talked to us about, we were talking about the power of digital journaling. And one of the tools he mentioned was Readwise, which is one tool that I use. And it also works with Air, the podcast app that I use. And I basically can get my clips and highlights from my podcast, from my books. And you can also get it from articles and things like that, connecting it to other tools. And it brings it all into one spot for you. And so I just wanted to make sure to mention that. Snippets. So real quick, our recap from yesterday. Yesterday we were talking about the moon and moonshots, and we talked about kind of the different ways of looking at it, different ways of approaching it, and how, Danielle comes at it from this kind of astrology angle, and I come at it more from the astrophysics angle and science. Yeah, like two opposite ends of the spectrum, like super sciencey and tech, and like very fact-based, and
just following in the pathway of all of the wise women of tribes that came before me that realized the moon cycle. Like, I just think that's so cool that literally thousands of years people have been noting observations and then using these natural cycles to learn more about our life as human. So
yeah. And for those who are looking for a song to listen to, Starman by David Bowie, which may not even be the song. It might be like Space Odyssey or something like that. That popped in my head. I'm like, Starman reaching for the sky, or stars, or something like that. I don't know the words. Danielle's got me.
I don't know that one
now
either.
too. What? Uh-oh.
I mean, I've heard it. I just don't know the words either.
Oh, okay, good.
Yeah, I don't know.
If you haven't heard that one, then so we talked about the moon. We talked about the concept of a moonshot, and I didn't mention it yesterday, but I want to mention it today because I'm a nerd and I want to find you fellow nerds out there. But there was this game I played. You actually might have played it with me back in the day, called O Game. Did you ever play that one with me?
Was that where you evolved from a single-celled organism into
No, that was Spore.
That's Spore. Okay.
I did mention that a few weeks ago or a week ago.
Oh,
I
okay.
like that one too. Yeah, how about I describe it?
spaceship.
Yeah, and then
Okay.
you can say that's what it is. I think it's ogame.org. We'll put a link in the chat if we find it. But ogame.org is a completely text-based game. And there were pictures, so you could see like, oh, you're building a ship, and this is what it looks like. But that's all you had was pictures and text. And it was a time-based game that was kind of related to real-world time. So a lot of times when you play video games, it's like, hey, I'm sitting down for this session, whether it be 5 minutes, maybe a couple hours. And within that session, that's how time works, right, for that. But usually you can accomplish a lot within those couple of hours. Well, this game was different because you would go and you would queue something up. Like, hey, I want to go research this thing. I want to go build this building. And it'd say, okay, it's going to take 10 minutes. And then you're like, all right, 10 minutes, and then you got to come back and build something.
Go back to taking notes in class, and then go back to your own.
Right. So this was in high school when I was doing that, back on the
college for me.
Back in the old phone browsers before they were really good. It was like just enough for me to do the types of things that I needed to do to get done. And I'll be quick because we got to move on. But it's a fun game. It's about like universe exploration. You start out on a single planet with nothing basically, and you build up resources. Then you can build ships, you can research technologies, then you can go and colonize other planets, you can go to other universes, you can attack other people, and you can even like spy on someone's planet to see how many resources they have, and then once you get super advanced, you can even like scan their planet and say, hey, their ships are going to be back in this amount of time. And then you time your attack to get there right after their ships arrive so you can blow up their ships and then harvest all the debris for resources. So that's what would happen a lot of times is I'd be in math class or whatever. I'm like, oh no, 5 minutes. I got to pressing buttons, trying to like send my stuff away. And then there's like the number one guy on the entire server coming to like attack me. I'm like, no, don't do it. I spent all this time building up those resources. I need to build that cool thing. But anyways, nerding out. The reason I brought it up was because one of the things you could do was create a moon to your planet. And the way that would happen is if there was a debris field that was large enough from some epic battle that happened, then there was a % chance that it would create a moon. And so what you would do is you would talk to your buddies and you would say, hey, like, let's trade moonshots. Like, I'm going to basically create a big fleet of spaceships and come attack your base. And I know they're all going to get destroyed, but it's going to give you a chance of getting a moon. And you do the same for me. And so that one was another moonshot that I want to mention yesterday. In case you guys want a little fun game to check out, or you happen to have played it before, let us know in the chat.
Well, it's not as fun as the game that popped into my head whenever you say
game. Okay,
and then it's a text and picture-based game.
Yeah.
I think like a sexting game.
Yeah, that does sound fun. Maybe we should make game 6.9,
Yeah.
Instead of 2.0.
Definitely.
All right, so recap. So we were talking about the moon, talked about moonshots, which is a concept. You're doing something that's so far out there. It's such a big reach, such a big leap that there's not that high chance of it happening. We talked about Google, who's a company that is famous for doing certain moonshots. We talked about the actual moon launch, back in 1969. Talked about goal setting. And then we ended with a couple of challenges. And the challenges were one, which was the easy one, was talking about making something with cheese, because since the moon is oftentimes said, made out of cheese, and Danielle was on the show, and she's basically made out of cheese as well. So I want to hear, Danielle, did you make good on your challenge to make something with cheese?
Oh, yeah. I had mac and cheese Monday.
Oh, okay.
I didn't have the queso in my mac and cheese like I posted on Instagram, because that was actually a couple weeks ago when I took the picture.
Wow, science.
Trying to like plan content ahead of time. What? No. But yeah, I added just the Land O'Lakes American cheese to my Annie's white cheddar boxed mac and cheese.
You need to make a dating app, or those of you
What
out
cheese
there,
do you put in your cheese?
make a dating app for cheeses.
Is it compatible with my mix of cheeses?
Yes, I think that should be how people should decide if they're compatible. What is your stance on cheese? Lactose intolerant people.
Oh, can't be with you.
Yeah.
You would probably break out just from kissing me.
That's the name of Danielle's new single coming out this weekend. You would break out just from kissing me. And wait for the hit sequel coming for that. And wait until your digestive system gets going.
Here's some Tums.
And another song just off that album, Cheesy One-Liners. I think we could come up with a whole 90s infomercial around that.
Oh, definitely.
So that's enough for yesterday.
Taylor Swift?
Okay. Lastly, our other challenge, which was the more meaningful challenge, which is depending on who, which one you want to put a little more stake in. But
Meaning?
Yeah, it's cheese. Was to challenge people to have a moonshot of their own. Danielle mentioned the phrase yesterday, oh, you reach for the moon, you shoot for the moon, even if you miss, you'll land among the stars. And we talked about how it's like, yeah, that's part of the reason of aiming so big and shooting so high is that it drastically changes the way you have to think about it, the way you have to approach the problem. Instead of, I think there's a 10x principle. It's like, instead of trying to do 1x, if you do 10x, it will inherently change the way that you think about something or look at something. It's like, it's one thing for you to say, hey, I'm going to, make sure I feed at least one person today. It's another thing to say, like, I want to end food insecurity in this entire county. And that's what our friends over at Community Garden Kitchen of Collin County do. You can go check out their website, communitygardenkitchen.org. We'll post a link to that in the chat. A local nonprofit here trying to end food insecurity in Collin County. Popped in my head, wanted to give them a random plug. But with that, let us move over to our intro. Helpful for life. Welcome to What the Hell is Water? I'm Reed Garcia, founder and CEO of Helpful for Life.
And I'm Danielle Garcia of DanielleMGarcia.com.
And that's Lincoln, our dog. He's the
he's a face down in the couch right now.
Official mascot of Helpful for Life, for today at least.
Mm-hmm.
So today is episode 83, and it is February 1st, 2022. Danielle, do you know anything special about today?
It's the Lunar New Year.
It was not even intentional at all that we talked about moons yesterday, but that was a nice little happy coincidence.
Well, it was intentional for me because it's the new moon today. So I think it's with the Aquarius new moon is the Lunar New Year.
I don't know. Yeah, see, astrology's like, woohoo. But
actually, I'm not sure what makes it Lunar New Year.
Well, regardless, when it comes to moons, I gotta know, did we make a joke about mooning people yesterday?
No.
That's another type of moon. We'll have to get into play somehow.
Blue moon.
Yeah, there's a song lyric for you. But for today we wanted to talk about skilled hobbies. And that, although that may sound like a weird thing, we got Smith in the chat saying hi, hello. Skilled hobbies may sound like a weird thing. It's basically just a combination of two things. One is the word hobby, which in my mind, how would you define a hobby before I take a swag at it?
That's a good question. So a hobby is an activity you choose to partake in your spare time that brings you some level of inherent joy. Maybe? Is that a good definition?
I mean, I think it's a pretty close one. I would say a hobby is something that, to me, in my mind, it's very important. Words.
Mm-hmm.
A hobby is something that you choose to do in your spare time.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would probably be a sufficient definition. Now, I would also hope that if you have hobbies, that they do bring you some joy. But I also like to use the word joy there instead of just happiness, because I think if you find the right hobby, it can give you a much more lasting feeling of positive feeling, whereas happiness is much more of like a fleeting emotion, like, oh, I feel happy like right now or today or for this hour, but that can go away. Whereas joy is a little more like full and satisfying, and can lead to you being happy over a long period of time. So that would be one slight modification I would make, but I like the word joy there.
Well, and I would say, so yeah, recently, one of my hobbies is horseback riding, and I got back into horseback riding in October of last year, and a couple of weeks ago, I had an evening where it was not very joy-filled, but long-lasting. I think it's good for me, and that's because my horse was having some anxiety in the ring and tried to buck me off.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Horseback riding is like marriage. Rough in the short term, but worth it in the long term. And if you're lucky, you can hope that your wife bucks you. So with that being said, I looked up the official definition. According to Oxford Languages, i.e. the Google Dictionary, which is activity done regularly in one's leisure time for pleasure. So leisure time
for pleasure,
and pleasure was in there as well. And however, this is a fun one, which you may not know. It's an archaic definition, but it says a hobby is a small horse or pony.
Oh, yeah, like a hobby horse.
Oh, so you didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we won't.
Well, that's cool that the first hobby I brought up was horseback riding.
Yeah, I know, right? So skilled hobby. So the hobby is that part, the word that we were talking about. And the next part was skilled. So the skilled aspect is just pointing out that this hobby requires some level of skill, which doesn't have to be big, and it can be something that you can improve at or you can grow at. And some people may be thinking like, well, that really narrows it down. It's like, not really. I think most hobbies involve some level of skill and can be improved upon. You know, even something like reading. Like, okay, well, you can start off with easier books with lower reading levels where the vocabulary's not as... You
can track your reading speed and see if that increases with the Kindle.
And you can just read about more complex topics, you know, things like that. Writing, likewise, same kind of thing. You could start out very simple, doing short, just sentences or tweets or whatever, and just kind of gradually get longer. You could start to write about more complex things. You could try and make poems where things, you know, need to fit within a certain structure or have rhyming, things like that. You know, even just something like a leisurely, I'm fishing or whatever. Like, okay, well, yeah, you can get better at that. You can dive into it and you can learn more about it. But anyways, I'm sure there are a couple things that are hobbies that aren't skilled, but most of them are, in my mind at least. And so I guess let me ask you, like, what do you think the benefit is of having a skilled hobby? That's a weird phrase when I said it like that. Skilled hobby.
Well, I guess for me, for the first thing that comes to mind isn't even about the skilled part. It's just what comes to my mind thinking about having hobbies recently is how I feel like a lot of people, you ask them, like, what are your hobbies? And maybe they struggle to think of something. Because I don't know, maybe this is just some conversations I've seen happen around the Mill House talking about businesswomen who are also moms. And it's like, well, in my spare time from my kids, I'm like working on my business. And so it's like, what hobbies am I cultivating? So maybe just the fact that like you're exploring hobbies at all, not even mattering about skilled.
Being skilled, yeah. Well, it's for those who aren't aware, Mill House is a local women's co-working space here in McKinney, Texas. So if you're in the area, you can check it out. If you end up signing up, mention Danielle. I don't know if she gets any money or anything,
but they know me. I'm like basically an original founding member from January 2020. Okay,
if you want,
that's how they introduce me. I'm like a founding member.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, also,
and Lunch Bunch is today, and it's free every Tuesday at 11:30. You can just show up at the Mill House, which is right behind the cotton mill. Go past the cotton mill parking lot, and then a woman presents on. Maybe it's a skilled hobby. Maybe it's an aspect of her business. And yeah, it's free. You can bring your lunch and take notes and do some networking.
Yeah. So a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was last week. Oh, man. January's been a very long month for us. Time has moved at a different pace.
Yes. Every day.
But last week, we had on Justin Corno. And one of the things he talked about was a men's team. And so we'll link to that episode in the chat. But the reason I brought that up is because this isn't exactly a women's team, but it does perform some of those functions. It gives you, so it's a women's co-working space, and it gives you that community, gives you that space to talk about things with each other. There's a lot of creatives in this space as well, so it gives you ability to bounce ideas off of each other, and it has some things to help you better your business, things like that. But the just here's your free ad, Millhouse. Hey Beth, how's it going? The founder of it she used to work at NASA. So she's a very smart lady, and she decided that, hey, women they're different than men, first of all. The other day we were talking about a little bit about, I think we were talking about races, but we were recognizing like, hey, it's not okay to say, hey, we're all equal, we're all the same. It's like, no, we're not. We're different. And the first step is recognizing that we're different and then doing the things to make up for those differences so we can kind of have a little bit of a level playing field. And so that's what Beth did. She said, hey, you know what? Women, they have a hard time prioritizing themselves. They have a hard time investing in themselves. She talked to me about how difficult it was for some people to realize that the individual, are worth spending money on, and saying like, hey, here's a time and a space where you can go and you can be yourself. You can work on whatever it is you're trying to do. If you don't know what you're trying to do, they can help you figure that type of stuff out. And so it's a really cool space. And one of the most valuable things that I've got or seen you get out of it is the relationships that you've had with some of these people and the conversations you have. And you might just be working there one day or just walking in and you're like, hey, I kind of overheard A, B, and C, like, do you guys mind if I join in? And they're always like, yeah, please, this is what this is about. And then you'll have some in-depth conversation. And, I've heard phrases like, wow, I've never done this before with people, and I really appreciate you guys helping me do this. And I've heard about many friendships being made and things like that. So it's been a really cool thing. So if you're in the Dallas area, especially if you're near McKinney, make sure to check out Millhouse. And if you're not in the area, go onto their social media and tell them you said hey, and tell them you support what they're doing. I don't know if there's ways to donate money or whatnot, but
yes, you can actually select Millhouse as a charity on Amazon Smile now, I think.
Nice. So you can go to smile.amazon.com and basically get set up to donate a percentage of every purchase you make on Amazon through them. The main caveat is when you're ordering, you go, instead of going to amazon.com, you just type the word smile at the beginning. So you go to smile.amazon.com. So I recommend everyone to do that. It's very easy to do. Another one I'll selfishly plug is Community Garden Kitchen. They're on there as well. So you can decide either one of these, which are local to us, which we love supporting local, or you could choose one that is national, right? One that I've started donating to, and that's one I've been donating to for a while, is Charity Water. I think access to water is a very important thing. Got exposed a lot to that through my Engineers Without Borders experience in college. And so, yeah. So we definitely digressed, but I think it was totally worth it because one of the values of Skilled Hobbies, to bring us back, is it can connect you into a community. And for example, let's talk about some of the skilled hobbies I have. The two big ones I have right now are Rocket League and disc golf. And Rocket League is a video game where very basic description is you're playing soccer, except you are a car, like a remote control car. And then the ball is much bigger than you, and you're trying to knock the ball into the goal. But to make things a little more interesting, you have a rocket on your rear bumper. So that makes you to where you can boost and you can go faster. But interestingly as well, these cars can jump. That's really the main physics stretch in the whole thing is the cars can jump. And then since you can jump and you can tilt your car back, you have a rocket, well, you can take off and you can fly through the air. And so you get to play this kind of really cool three-dimensional soccer sport. And so, yeah, so that's one of them. And the other one I'm into is disc golf, which is, for those of you who've heard of Frisbee, you're throwing a flying disc, just kind of passing it back and forth. Then there's also Ultimate Frisbee, which is where you have a Frisbee and instead of just passing it back and forth, it's kind of like football. You're trying to score into a touchdown, throw the Frisbee to someone who is in the touchdown. They might call it something else, maybe just the end zone or whatever. And then there's disc golf, which, depending on who you tell, it's like, oh, why isn't it Frisbee golf? Some people say you don't even need to say disc golf anymore. It's just golf. And some people will be like, oh, you got to differentiate from ball golf. there's a whole
Yeah, good luck making that cultural shift.
right. But that's the fun thing though, is like all these things I just mentioned right now, that's part of the culture and the community that I've learned from spending time with people in the sport, and also being on things like Reddit, where you can subscribe to these subreddits and say, hey, I like disc golf, like let's see what people are talking about, and you get to see some tips, you get to see some videos of people trying to improve their form. So yeah, you get to get plugged into that community. And so disc golf has been one of the ways I've really grown my relationship with one of my friends. It's been a great way for me to get outside, and something I haven't done as much of this month, which I recognized earlier this week. I'm like, you know what? I need to make that a priority this week, is start doing that more. And then with Rocket League, likewise, I got same kind of thing, playing with buddies. Been a great way for me to build relationships and have those conversations with people. Like kind of like we talked about the book club. It's a good excuse to have something to do together. But you still get to talk with the person and get to spend time with them, because that is really one of the biggest purposes. So yeah, community is a big part. And then there are also communities you can get plugged into. Like with Rocket League, I joined leagues, and I'm in Discord servers, which so we can chat with people live. And so community is a big aspect of it. Let's talk about the skill part of it. So with both disc golf and Rocket League, especially me being the guy who loves to figure out how everything works, in case people didn't notice, both of these games actually inherently involve a lot of physics. And so they work nicely for my brain. Is like, oh, I know that if I throw the disc this way, it's going to do this thing. Or if I, fly through the air this way, hit the ball that way, I know it's going to go and do that thing. So I like that aspect. To use a fancy word, it's deterministic, meaning like you do things a certain way. Kind of like yesterday, we were talking about the rules of the universe. Mm-hmm. Well, those rules of the universe apply here. And by working on the skill aspect of it, you start to develop and get better at it. And what do you think about that aspect, Daniel? The skill and the developing and getting better.
I think that, well, I guess it can help with like to have measurable progress. I guess you're seeing like, oh, I'm spending this time doing this. I think for me, not that you need to have like validation for your hobbies, but I do think it's nice to be like, oh, I'm getting this like tangible, measurable improvement in, yeah, maybe it's skills, but that's not even, it's just like, oh, I'm getting better at doing this thing that I take pleasure in doing. So I feel like inherently you probably get more pleasure once you feel like you understand it more and you get like better at it.
Yeah. So for example, in the new game we're going to be launching sometime later this year, in theory, new O game, yeah. You can inherently get better and improve at your ability to
dirty talk, get
the O, or yeah, dirty talk, or whatever it may be. We'll see if we end up doing anything with that. That'd be fun.
Close
but yeah,
the orgasm gap.
I like it. So the thought process is that a couple things. One, I just really like the idea of a hobby is something that you're choosing to do. You're doing it in your own time. So you have that control. You have work and you have things you got to do for work, but someone else is telling you what to do, right? And you've got to go and play by their rules, do their things, do things the way they want to. Whereas with a hobby, you get to decide. You choose what it is you're doing. You choose how you do it. You choose if you're trying to improve with it or not. Maybe you're just doing it for fun. And that's a really important thing that I want to point out with skilled hobbies is I think it's natural to have ebbs and flows where you're like, hey, I'm going to kind of push and like do a little bit more and get a little bit better. And then, you know what, I'm going to coast. I'm going to plateau for a while. Like part of the reason I play Rocket League is just to chill and hang out. And like, if I'm not like getting a better skill or moving up in the ranks, like a lot of people really beat themselves up over that. Like, oh, I was platinum and now I should be grand champion by now. Oh, what the heck? Oh, man, grumble. Instead of just being like, hey, like this is a video game. This is a hobby. Like one of the reasons at least you play this is for fun. So keeping that in mind is very important. But it's also really cool to go and do the thing and then be better at something. And so that's one of the reasons I really like Rocket League is because there's so many different areas you can grow in if you want to. And there's so many different ways to do it that the replay value is infinite. And I think I've said it before on the show, but I'll say it again and probably make a separate video on it. I think Rocket League's one of, if not the best video games ever created. And I don't mean that in overstatement. And we'll talk more about that in that separate video. But for those who want a little bit of a reason to go check it out, there you go. And you can improve, your control of your car. You can improve how well you control the ball. You can improve like your teamwork. Like there's so many different areas. Like, okay, hey, today I'm gonna go learn how to do that new thing. There's a fancy thing called a air dribble. Like, okay, well, I've never done that before. Well, I'm gonna start working on my air dribbling, and then depending on how hard you want to hit it, maybe you do a bunch of research and you do a bunch of stuff, and like for a week you grind it out, and then you do really good. Or maybe it's just like over a few months, like, hey, these next few months I'm gonna work on my air dribbling. You're like, oh, I'll casually do this. I'll do a little bit of that. And then maybe a few months later, you're like, oh, okay, now I can do it. There's a lot of different ways you could do it, a lot of different intensities you can go at it. But I think that's one of the cool things. It's like you're doing it in your own time, and you're choosing to get better at something. And you can also a lot of times literally see the change and see the improvement. And I think that's really good and really powerful from a psychological perspective. And it helps me feel better and enjoy the things that I'm doing and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So one other example I wanted to give was I have a buddy who's into woodworking, and you just good old fashioned, piece of wood that he grabs out in the forest, the trees around his house or whatever, and a knife. And, I bet he probably started with a pocket knife, and now I wouldn't be surprised if he started to invest in some specialized tools. I also wouldn't be surprised if he's still just using pocket knife. But as I've talked with him over the last year, or at least last few months, as he started to get more into the hobby, he's like, yeah, I started to do, a little bit more, started to look on YouTube, find a little bit more. Oh, now I'm doing some separate pieces. Like, I'll do the head first, and then I'll do the body, and I'll like connect them together. And he's like enjoying starting to do more complex things. And the cool thing about that, kind of like a lot of the creative things, is he ends up with some physical representation of the thing he did, right? So kind of like if you were writing or singing or whatever, recording, having something that exists outside of yourself is another cool thing you can do with a hobby. What are your thoughts on that?
Like art. I mean, and then like handwriting, hand lettering, calligraphy. Those are some other like, I guess, creative, physical representations. Sorry, didn't have much on that.
Oh, you're good. You don't always have to have anything on anything. No, yeah, just talking about how, you can do these creative things and they can exist outside of yourself. And part of the cool thing about that is you inherently have something you can share with somebody, right? And whether that's a friend, a family member, or just some random person online, right? Maybe, for example, with my woodworking friend, he takes a picture and maybe he sends it to a community that he's a part of, or maybe he just takes a picture and sends it to me, his buddy, and like, hey, I thought you might like this one or whatnot. And I think that's a cool aspect too. And it also starts a conversation, gets you thinking like, oh, wow, that's really cool. I'd never thought about using wood or touching wood and doing whatever it's called, wood carving. I've never thought about that before. And I was like, oh, but actually, now that you do that, maybe you should talk to my friend who does leatherworking. Like, I bet there's some cool things you guys could trade notes on. And it's like, huh, never would have had that thought, never would have made that connection, had that person never talked about that hobby before. So that's another aspect of hobbies, is it can open you up to whole other worlds, whole other people that you never would have thought about. And oh, by the way, it can be drastically different people from drastically different walks of the world. But they both like this hobby, so they can do it. Like, so say, for example, photography. And like, oh, one of my buddies is getting into photography a lot, and you can go check out their channel at Hooked on Macro. It's on Instagram. We'll post the link in the chat. And it's cool to see, like, hey, I needed an excuse to start trying to get better and do more with my camera. Like, I got this fancy camera, I want to use it more. And so he got a macro lens and started to take more photos and started to try some new things. And now I got to the point where his camera is not, if not out, it's in a bag where he knows exactly where it is, and he can go easily grab it and go take some photos, and it'll just be a Monday night. And it's like, you know what? I got some really cool pictures of my dog last night, or, oh, here, check out this cool video of us walking down the street, and it's like, those are things he wouldn't have done otherwise. Now he has captured that memory. And also he's trying to get better. So he's doing some research and he's looking at these things. And one of the things I'm encouraging him to do is to go to like a conference or like a retreat or like a place where it's like, hey, go where there's a bunch of people who do this macro stuff. And you guys could talk and trade notes and be like, oh, here's how I do it. Here's what you do. Here's the things I've learned. And, oh, by the way, it's like maybe you brush shoulders with someone's like, oh, well, this person's a business executive. This person's a janitor or whatever. And this person's from this part of the world. This person's from that part of the world. We just all happen to be interested in photography. So that's another cool aspect about hobbies. You know, we mentioned the community aspect, but I wanted to emphasize the diversity of people who can do a hobby. Another example is when I played basketball at a pickup work league. It's like it didn't matter where you were on the company ladder when you stepped on that court. It's like you were bodying, you were bumping, your elbow and all that type of stuff. And it was like it literally was like one of the guys was the custodian and one of the guys was an executive. And it's like, if no other reason, like if you want to use a hobby as a selfish advantage to help you get ahead, to network or whatever, that's another good reason to do it. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to make sure to point out was you and I didn't talk before I wrote the description. I just thought it was interesting that you brought up one of the exact same things that I put in the description. So the description today, I referenced a story where I asked someone the other day, I said, hey, what do you do for fun? And they said they didn't know. And they said, I used to bake before kids. And they talked with this like finality, like, oh yeah, now that I have kids, I can't do anything, right? And have you ever heard anyone say something along those lines before? Mm-hmm. And that's, you know, one of my personal missions is to help people realize the things they can do with their kids, right? And not to let that be a limiting factor. And I guess the first thing I wanted to point out was I didn't blame this person for not knowing or for not doing those things. But I did want to kind of be like, hey, like you still can do something, like, you know, whether it's with your kids or without your kids. Like, I think it's very important for people to do something for just themselves. So I guess that would be another aspect of skilled hobby is just the intentionality of it and choosing to do something for themselves. Any thoughts on any of that?
No.
No, not really. All right. Anything else on skilled hobbies popping in your head?
Well, I don't know.
No?
No.
Okay, that's fine.
Not really.
No, that's good. I think we've covered a good bit on it. So, any, you know, as I give a recap here, see if there's any challenges that popped to your head that you think from our discussion today, or whether it be O game or, you know, skilled hobby or whatnot. See if anything had popped in your head from our episode today. So we'll just go ahead and jump into the recap for today. So today we've been talking about skilled hobbies. Before that, we kind of had a bit of a drawn out first bit, if you will, where Danielle and I ended up talking a good bit about her book club that she was a part of, because it kind of tied in nicely with our discussion today about the value of skilled hobbies. And she mentioned how the book club is a great way for her to spend some time with her family and have a monthly thing where she's hanging out with them and seeing their faces on video chat and talking. And yeah, they also have books that sometimes spark some discussions they wouldn't have had otherwise. And so after talking about that for a while, we actually transitioned to the topic of the day, which was skilled hobbies. We talked about the value of, or we talked about what they were, right? The hobby is something that you do on your own time, for pleasure. And we mentioned how maybe having a hobby, or especially a skilled hobby, can help you bring joy from that hobby instead of just happiness, because it can be a little more anchored, and you can, you know, by something you do regularly, by seeing yourself get a little bit better, like those can help you psychologically. They can help you feel better. They can help you be more likely to do the thing. We talked about the value of community and how hobbies can be a great way for you to get some community, whether that be through online communities or in person, you know, or even just being a passive member of a community by following a subreddit on Reddit. Say, hey, this is a group of people who are all interested in underwater basket weaving or whatever that thing may be for you. And you can just see all the things that those people are thinking about, all those things people are talking about. And you can pick up any one of these hobbies and you can go many different ways with it. We talked a little bit about the hobbies that I have, which are disc golf and Rocket League right now. Those are two of my biggest ones. Not listed in there but also a hobby is eating and drinking.
Always.
Very skilled at those. What would you say your hobbies are?
Horseback riding, tarot, journaling, cooking. I started a dance fitness class, so learning like ballroom dancing. I feel like there was more.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty good list, and if you run out after 5, that's probably a good sign. And like another one that you do every now and then is you like to play Red Dead every now and then, Red Dead Redemption video game, and
Yeah,
we play board games
I
together and stuff
wasn't
like that.
including video games as a hobby for me.
Right, it's not, but it's one that you do every now and then, if you will. But yeah, so there's some of Danielle's hobbies, which I also wanted to make sure you told your little story. So the quick aside about your horseback riding and how you first got started. Your parents said they were going to pay for it.
Oh, yeah. Well, combining two of my hobbies was when I started horseback riding in 5th grade, and my parents told me that they would let me start taking horseback lessons, but only if I would keep a journal after every lesson. So,
yeah,
that was like the longest stint at consistent journaling that I'd had in my adolescent years. Probably was from 6th through 8th or 9th grade, whenever I was keeping my horseback journal, and then once I changed barns and got into like 9th or 10th grade, I stopped keeping the journal, but kept taking lessons.
Oh, sneaky possum. So we'll have to get some excerpts from that journal one day, maybe later this week. That would be fun. So to continue the recap, we talked a little bit about our hobbies, and we never explicitly listed them out, but we had referenced and alluded to the fact that Danielle journals as one of her main hobbies. And then disc golf and Rocket League for me. We had a little bit of a nerd out on a game called O Game that I played back in high school.
Did?
Yeah, it was mostly just me. I nerded out hard. So please, if any of you have any idea what this O Game is, validate me. Tell me that you feel the nerdiness that I felt when I mentioned O Game, because it was great. And it was also cool, different. Anyways.
Don't do it again.
Don't do it again. Don't do it again. So yeah, I think that's a decent enough recap for today. Did you have any challenges that popped to mind, or would you like me to take a swing at it?
Well, I was just gonna say, go think about like, oh, if I'm gonna list out my interests, don't even start with hobbies. Like, they don't have to be a hobby. Just list out interests or skills or topics or activities that you think you might want to try, and then maybe go online and find a blog post or a YouTube video, like how to get started with blank.
Yeah, I like that. So the challenge is to make a list of your interests and say, hey, which one of these do I want to maybe prioritize a little bit more? Mm-hmm. And which one of these do I want to spend a little bit more time in?
Intentional playtime.
Intentional playtime. I like that. And then as like a bonus point or whatever is like, if that ends up being a skilled hobby, I think that's a great step, right? And don't feel like it needs to be, especially if you're the type who's like, oh, I'm always overwhelmed. There's always so many things to do. Like, I don't want it to just be another thing that I have to do. Well, first off, like, mindset, like it's like you're doing this for fun and you're improving it for fun. So that is inherently different. So I just want to make sure to point that out, because, if it's you doing it because you're choosing to do it and because you recognize that you're going to get value out of it and you're getting joy and pleasure out of it, it's inherently different. And I can't overstate that enough, because I know we certainly can feel overwhelmed all the time. Not all the time, but many times. And like I mentioned, sometimes that leads to you letting the hobbies drop off. So like, oh, I realized I wasn't playing disc golf as much. So then I was like, that means I'm not getting outside as much, which means I'm not moving my body as much, which means I'm sitting in my desk longer, which means I'm working longer hours than I recognize as that I want to. And so right there, you kind of hear like this hobby is now, just because of the fact that I used to do it regularly, has created kind of a natural trigger. Like, hey, you used to do that a lot. Like, now you're not. Like, why is that? And fortunately for me, this is something that we've started to do every week. We're like, hey, how did this last week go? What went well? What could you have done better? And what are you going to do this upcoming week to make that a priority? Like, what are you going to do differently, right? Because certainly if there's one thing we've done is we've fallen into plenty of traps ourselves where we get into a certain mindset or we're doing things a certain way and we're like, how do we get out of this? And, you know, the definition of insanity is, and I don't know this, but I've heard this phrase many times. Definition of insanity is doing the same thing multiple times but expecting a different result. So sometimes you just need to have that, okay, this is the third week now where I didn't get outside as much as I wanted to. Well, what am I going to do differently? Oh, I'm going to put it on my calendar. I'm going to invite my friends and say, hey, on Wednesday, we're going at this time. And just making it happen, right? So sometimes just about putting it on your calendar. So with that, I think that might be a good place to call. Oh, nope. This is what Reed does. He starts to wrap it up, and then he's like, "Oh, more genius ideas." I had, and when you were giving the challenge, I had the realization of what the non-skilled hobbies are, and those are hobbies that are solely of consumption. And so, for example, one of the things that popped in my head was like, "Oh, well, I watch football," or "Oh, I watch Netflix." And I want to make sure to point out, like, I don't think those are inherently bad hobbies by themselves. I do think that many people take those to extremes. And maybe if I use the word Instagram or TikTok, like maybe like, oh, well, I spend a lot of time doing those things, which, you know, again, like not trying to make anyone feel bad or guilty, but just like recognize. And if you've got the screen time app or similar, you can look and see like, hey, this week I spent 20 hours on Instagram. Is that what I want to be doing? Is that, or maybe should I replace, I don't know, 5 of those hours trying a new hobby, or maybe 10 of those hours, or maybe all of those hours? You know, that's up to you to decide what you want to do. But the first step is recognizing what it is you're doing. And then the next step is deciding if you want to make some changes. And you don't need to. Like, again, not here to poo-poo on anything, but there's also some ways you could take a consumption hobby, like whether it be reading a book or consuming some content, whether it be sports or otherwise, is engaging with other people about it, right? And maybe you try and do something additional around it. Maybe, oh yeah, you've been playing or watching sports for a while. Maybe you decide to pick up a video game, or maybe you decide to join a group where you guys go together to a bar or a house and you watch it together, and then you have that bonding and things like that. And again, not every hobby needs to be skilled, but just wanted to make sure I like, oh, those are the ones that is like, if it's purely consumption based, there's not as much skill involved. There's my last minute add on that. So with that, I think that ends the show where new material comes out in the recap. That's what we're good at. But with that, everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday.